Welcome back to the Sika podcast.
Well, this is more seeking YouTube.
It is really, actually, yeah. So welcome back
Yeah.
to the Sika YouTube. What we're doing today is basically running through a few form checks. So we have a selection of videos here. We're gonna pop over and back between them, and just kind of give you an idea of what we're looking for when we're looking at kind of snatch and clean and jerk technique, and hopefully answering a few questions. So these videos are from people who've posted on our Patreon stream. So you'll get a good idea anyway of kind of what we're looking for, or the different kind of coaching cues we'll be giving, and just some feedback, some kind of general feedback on their training. We'll probably comment a lot on their home training setups as well, just because we're nosy people.
Bear in mind, just before we begin, these are not exclusives to the Olympic lifts. They are for any lift, really.
Yeah.
But primarily, people usually look for feedback in the lifts because they are obviously the most technical and have the highest learning curve and the steepest. And sometimes the learning curve jumps back on you and gets really high out of nowhere, even after like 8 years. So it's a bit of a see you next Tuesday kind of learning curve.
Yeah.
So I'd actually a really good question, and I'm just going to do a little Instagram video TV for my own one. Someone asked me, do I think some people should forget, just not worry about form so much and just train? And go check out my Instagram TV when this is out.
When's that going to go up?
There. I'll do it there this evening after this. Just record it. Just me blabbering in front of the camera.
Yeah.
It's a good question. I'll try and do more of my Q&As. I might do a video a day. Just pick a good one and do a bit of a longer video, because it's sometimes they require more context than the answer I can give in the space I can write on my Instagram stories, and 15 seconds of talking is nowhere near enough time. So
you've a serious amount of Q&As answered now. What's it up to now?
It must be, I've no idea. It must be over. It must be close to a couple of thousand.
Yeah,
by now.
I'd say it is, if very not close more, to 2,000.
Oh no, way more than 2,000. I'm talking like 3,000 or 4,000.
Really?
If not more, like.
Yeah.
Because it was like 1,000 last. Actually, it's probably closer to 5,000, if not more.
Yeah. Craziness.
There's a phenomenal amount.
Huge commitment to the cause.
I've been doing it since like fucking. What's that?
Huge commitment to the cause.
It keeps you on your toes, you know.
Yeah. Right.
So we better get rolling, because this is actually a YouTube video as well.
Yeah.
So first up, we have a clean and jerk. Right. So 220. Oh, that's 2020. How much weight is this?
224 pounds, I think.
So about
100 kilos.
Say around 100 kilos. All right, Fitz, you want to go first and give us your kind of.
So I think how we should kind of break this up is look at the clean first. In terms
to the start, like.
In terms of the first pull in the clean, I wouldn't change a huge amount there. One thing I would look at changing. So obviously, like, these, we're kind of picking every single possible thing apart. And just giving a real. So like, these things mightn't be huge issues at all, but they're just things that we'd keep an eye on ourselves. With the kind of setup before he lifts the bar, there seems to be a lot of movement going on. So it's like rocking back, you see toes coming up off the floor, the bar is kind of rolling forwards and backwards. Depending on the level of experience this person has with the lifts, that's probably something I'd look to take out. I'd just make that a small bit more kind of rudimentary and basic. Maybe just get their feet set, get their hands set, and then start with a pull off the floor, rather than something like that that's kind of a semi-dynamic start. Then in terms of the first pull itself, so the pull from the floor up as far as the kind of bottom of the kneecap, nothing majorly wrong here. The first pull looks actually quite good. One thing I'd say is that when we go to, so like, people have different opinions over where the first pull ends and the second pull starts, but there's an area basically around the knee that some of the European coaches will call knee passage, and what we're seeing here,
it's where the bar, so the speed of the velocity of the bar drops, and it's basically impossible to eliminate that drop in speed, but it's probably the best point where you could pinpoint where it goes from the first pull to the second pull, I would say.
So what we're kind of going to refer to it as is the first pull now, I'm going to say, is to the bottom of the kneecap. Then this kind of knee passage in inverted commas will be from the kind of 4 or 5 inches around the knee joint basically, and then the second pull where girth is going to take over is going to be from the kind of top of the quadriceps tendon up into the hip. So just with regards to the first pull, nothing majorly wrong. Looks quite good. Back angle looks good. One thing is when he goes to transition around his knees, you'll now see that his knees are very, very far back. So his knee here, I'm just struggling to pause it at the right point. His knees here almost seem to go too far back. And I think the weight is too far back in his heel, so you'll see a small bit of the toe starting to come up. And you can actually see that as he's making contact then at the top of his second pull, you see a small bit of the toes raising, so that's the weight has gone back too far onto his heel. So first pull is quite good. Then I think he lets the bar get away from himself, and his knees track back too far in that knee passage area. What would you say around that, Girl?
I'd say, so like Dara was saying, he's gone to nearly 180 degrees of leg extension.
Yeah.
So you want to be close to 180, but you don't want to ever get to fully locked out. So you want to be something like maybe like 170 or something like that. So you don't want a straight line, but you want to be close to a straight line. The reason for this is you want the bar, so within the first pull towards the second pull, you want the bar moving back towards the center line, if you can imagine the lift from the side. So overall, like, this lift is quite good quality. So the biggest thing with this lift, I think, is this person just needs to spend more time training and getting used to the movements. So like Dara was saying, the first pull is nice and good. So you hear Dara talk a lot about pre-performance routine. You hear him talk about setting up, and there's this kind of too much happening in this. So the bar is rolling, kind of twitching. So what we'd like to see is you step up to the bar, you get your feet, and you go left hand, right hand, and then you set up. You either do a dynamic start, maybe at the beginning, you kind of reduce down that dynamic and you get it nice and relaxed, nice and calm. You zone in on your concentration and then you get going.
Yeah.
So first pull is good, like Dara was saying. Knee passage is pretty good. So we're seeing him up on his toes a little bit, which is not something that's too far back. And you see, so in the second pull, probably the biggest thing is change of speed is not good enough. I would say there needs to be more distinct change in speed. So maybe a little bit slower from the ground. So you go a little bit slower, then accelerate faster. So the speed is a little bit too constant. And then you can see that kind of travels on to the third pull. So when he's turning the bar over, he's actually a little bit slower than all of them, which is the one that needs to be the fastest. So what I would focus on there is pulling as hard as he can after the second pull and through the second pull. So it's a little bit of there's a little bit of stop motion. If you watch his body as well in full extension, he's actually kind of waiting for the bar at the top, which there's no need. So you want to see him getting on the bar a little bit sooner. So usually the bar in technicality only needs to get to like belly button height or a little bit higher to be able to clean it successfully. So he's catching this well above parallel and writing it down. So I'd like to see a little bit of faster second pull, really aggressively pulling under the bar. So not pulling the bar up and catching it and writing it down. I'd like to see him pull the bar fast, but at the same time he's using the bar to pull himself under like a gymnast would under, or like someone in CrossFit might do cycling pull-ups, that kind of like you're using the bar to pull yourself down underneath the bar.
So just the kind of last point I'd make there on the second pull is his contact is happening at the right place at the hip. He doesn't have any kind of additional elbow bend. He's not rolling the bar into himself. The contact is happening kind of a third of the way down his thigh. I think that's a good thing. He appears to be extending vertically up rather than kind of throwing his shoulders back. So there are very good things happening here. But as you were saying, like that, the velocity or the increase in velocity as the bar goes from the floor past your knee up into the second pull is a thing that people really don't seem to kind of tune into when they're just watching videos or just kind of reviewing this or reviewing kind of clean and jerk technique or snatch technique. And it is one of the kind of the finer points that makes a huge difference when you're starting to lift heavier weights.
I would say for this person in particular, a lot of times people ask about moving their feet. Should I lift and slide like Chinese? Are they seeing videos of clock off using people to knock clips out the way.
Yeah.
And then we see people like Gabriel moving their feet very aggressively. And there's kind of been a notion in the last few years that moving your feet is bad, that like lifting your feet high is fundamentally a really poor technique, and there is no point to it. It's kind of the I don't want to say delusion that people have, but it comes from, I suppose, a lack of understanding of the lifts really. And in this case, this particular lifter looks like he would benefit from a bit more of an aggressive foot movement.
Yeah.
So I'd like to see if he lifts his feet up a little bit. I think that actually helps him get down a little faster. So
an auxiliary thing that I think that would really help with is he's rocking back onto his heels quite a lot, especially like as he's extending up. He's like way back on his heels. His toes are up, and then he extends up. And I think if you start making someone like that move their feet more, or kind of a flat-footed move, so like not a really loud stamp, but like a more kind of asserted effort to move their feet, I think that'll stop him shifting his weight quite so much. He also has a small bit of a hop forward here, which obviously isn't ideal, but that's coming from that kind of weight transitioning thing of weight going from his toes to his heels back to his toes again, and the bar just having a small bit of movement in the positive direction. So yeah, if I was looking for cues here, I'd say the 3 cues I would give in terms of the pull in the clean would be a much simpler start and setup, slower pull off the ground, and then faster extension at the hip.
On the idea of moving from space to space or from position to position weightlifting, the reason he may end up back on his heels as well is because at the start, before he pulls the bar, he rocks back onto his heels, and there's this kind of a notion our bodies kind of tend to want to and end up back in the position we start in. So sometimes people like to start at the bottom of the squat, so it helps them kind of reinforce getting underneath the bar. So sometimes it helps people a little bit, and I think that might be part of the reason that when he rocks back behind the bar here in the start position, so his toes are off the ground, so if you pause just when his shoulders are behind the bar, I think this is kind of emphasizing rocking back on his heels, which is something we definitely don't want. So like Dara was saying there, just really reducing down the amount happening in this first pull or the setup would help a lot with this. Moving on to the split jerk, there's a couple of things that I would change. So first of all, the easiest one to change, and this is the biggest one, is just eliminate as much time as you can while waiting around at the bar in your chest. So this is one of the worst things you can do, and it's the easiest one to fix. It doesn't take any cueing, just start your split jerk sooner. So you just want to minimize the amount of time that the bar is on your chest. So you stand up from the clean, you make the process for moving from the clean to the split jerk as efficient as possible. So we're not talking about rushing it, but we want to minimize everything that's happening and just get going as soon as you can.
Yeah, like if you look here, I'm just counting out the amount of seconds before he dips. So he's looking at around 6 or 7 seconds after standing up. It should be stand up, re-rack with one movement. So it shouldn't be re-rack, then kind of move your hands, then get your elbows set, then take a breath, then move your head back. Like, this is the thing again of just more reps, more time on the bar, more kind of solidified motor patterns. But when you're standing up, you really do need to be efficient, like you're saying. So the next thing I'd say is that when he goes to dip, it's almost just a drop down into the bottom of the dip position. So it's a very, very kind of aggressive dip down, and it's not a matched aggression on the way up then. So if you want to dip down really fast, you've then got to accelerate up really fast out of the dip. And what's happening here is the bar is actually coming off his chest a small bit as he's dipping down, and it's just kind of a jerking motion into the bottom, which is a poor choice of words because that's not what we want for the jerk. So less time with the bar in your chest is what I would say, and then a more controlled dip and drive. If you think about the dip and drive as being an exercise where you load up 2 springs, as in your fucking quads and hips and glutes, so you're loading up that spring to then explode out with as much energy as possible. The last thing I want to do if I'm loading up a spring is just fucking punch it as hard as I can. I want to have a good kind of controlled squeeze down, and then I can let the spring go, rather than it being a drop, and bounce and kind of hope the bar comes up off my chest.
Yeah, you want a smooth force curve, so you want
Yeah.
the force to build up gradually, but gradually is kind of a poor word there, more of a fluid
Yeah.
increase in force and then change in direction. So minimize the amount of time you're at the bottom of the dip. So there ultimately has to be a pause, but you want to minimize that pause as much as you can. So you want to hit the bottom nice and fast and then turn around direction smoothly but very promptly.
What I'd
In this,
what
yeah,
what I kind of point to on that is, if I had somebody standing in the gym or wherever they are and they wanted to do a vertical jump as high as they possibly could, they wouldn't just kind of pull their feet out in front of them and drop down really fast and then try and jump. It would be a smooth down. It would be a really, really smooth transition, and then they jump up as high as possible rather than it being this kind of drop and then try and jerk it.
on the actual split jerk position itself, what I would change is so the entire split itself is too short. So it's too short and the space it's too narrow. So his feet are almost so the front of his both of his toes are almost directly in line with each other. So I'd like to see that widened out. So maybe shoulder width or a little bit wider. I'd like to see the back heel is too close to the ground. And so sometimes you see people teaching as well as toes turned in. I particularly wouldn't teach that, but it's not seen as a bad thing in most weightlifting
Yeah.
cultures in terms of foot position.
Yeah, I think the toe in thing is it's one of these kind of minuscule things that make no difference. It's something that like it's so insignificant we don't tend to cue it. But we definitely wouldn't coach someone to lift like that. I think the back leg here, I'm not sure if you said it already, but the back leg is very, very straight there. And I think that's leading to that heel being too close to the ground. So I think obviously if he gets a bit wider, that back foot wouldn't toe in quite as much. And then if he just puts a small bit of a bend in that back knee, like 15, 25, 30 degrees, something like that, it will raise up that heel. It will give him a small bit more of a responsive foot position. And it will just help him a small bit. In terms of good points here, he has a strong wrist position overhead. He's catching it with his elbows relatively well locked out. It's not a perfect lockout position, but it just looks a bit tough overhead. This is a PR attempt, so like we're picking this apart. But in terms of overall technique for somebody who's hitting this weight for the first time, I'm not sure how much of a PR it is, but like we're not seeing super sloppy technique here. We're seeing somebody catching the bar still with a full hook grip on the bar, even though the turnaround is a bit slow. We're seeing like good bottom positions, good strong catch positions in both the clean and the jerk. So I think there are definitely some positives to be taken from this. And obviously we're being super, super, super critical because we've spoken for 18 minutes about one video.
So before we move on, we'll give some advice. So what we'd recommend in training. So for the clean, I would go for 2 auxiliary movements. I would look at below the knee hang cleans, and then I would also introduce possibly in the same session or is in the same complex or on a different time is above the knee hang cleans for this lifter. So maybe sets of 2 to 3 sub-maximal weights. I would go quite low with the hang, so I'd go down to just above the floor without touching. I would focus on having his shoulders on top of the bar or preferably in front of them when it's just above the floor. And then, so in that case, you'd want to focus on not rocking back on his heels too much. And I would focus on really fast turnover in the hang clean above the knee. I suppose they'd probably make 2 movements I would focus on for his training.
What I'd be kind of recommending for the jerk stuff then would be that kind of every time he's doing, I'm not sure what program this guy's on or if he's on a Sika program, but that he's doing jerks every time he's doing cleans. So if it's like, if he's doing power cleans, he's doing jerks afterwards. If he's doing those hang complexes that you're talking about, he's doing jerks afterwards, and just getting more reps in on the jerk. And being kind of like, we talk about being like a fucking OCD about your technique, but being really OCD about the things like the foot placement things we spoke about, and in particular really getting your kind of consistency of movement to improve. So as he stands up out of the clean, he's not taking that 17 step pre-performance routine for the jerk. It's stands up, re-racks, sets his shoulders and goes. Just simplifying things a small bit, and ingraining those
Alright.
motor patterns. So I've sent you the next link there.
Last night
So this is the same dude again, and this is a snatch.
hang snatch, below the knee PR.
Hang
Oh, it's good
snatch.
to see. Okay,
Okay.
let me watch it. Let
So-
me watch it again.
One thing I'd say on this, just as you're reviewing that, is you'll oftentimes see people having kind of superior positions from the hang than they will setting up from the floor. It's just easier for kind of beginners to get into a position when they're already under load. So if they have a bar at their hip, like everybody will find this, it's just a lot easier to have like really, really good back positions, better shoulder
Yep.
positioning when they're under a bit of load getting set up. So it would be normal for
And
you.
it is a great tool. It's not something I'd shy away from.
No.
It's not kind of a maladaptive. It's not like one of those things where you have to slam the bar 6 times before you lift it off the ground,
Yeah.
kind of thing. It's a good pattern to learn. Like, you have to learn it somehow, and however you figure it out.
Yeah.
Sorry, there's not actually a bear in my room. It's just my half pug, half thinks Charles Bailey is.
And she
trying to-
breathes so loud.
She's adorable all the same, though.
As she's an adorable little dog.
So
Okay, do you want to
on
take the
this
first
lift-
pulls this time, and I'll go through the kind of turnover and stuff?
So what I really like about this, right, is when people do hangs, and it's a terrible habit. He doesn't do this now. Is people pick up the bar like a deadlift and not like the pull. So his is quite similar. It's quite a nice position. He's not really high hips.
Yeah.
It looks like he could snatch that. So first pull. There's a little bit of a. Sorry, no. Let me just move this fucking grizzly bear. Sit her upright. Can you see her?
Yeah, I can see her.
So what I like is the pull is nice and it's quite controlled. He's in the bar. His positions are good.
Yeah.
There's a little bit of a knee kick in on the way up,
Yeah.
which is not necessarily a bad thing, but usually for beginners, this kind of implies maybe a lack of control. Maybe it's possible. Now this is we don't know, but he could be flat-footed, or he could have collapsed arches or something like that. It may be just from a lack of awareness of this position at the knee. So while I wouldn't be encouraging him to push his knees out, I would definitely be aware of that. And sometimes these things happen and you're just not aware of them. As soon as you become aware of them, you can go, oh, my knees kick in when I pull off the ground. So it's probably just more of a leakage of power when pushing off the ground. So he doesn't do it when he does it from the pull from the ground, but from the hang. I'd say this is rather more of a thing where he's just not aware and he's not staying as kind of screwed into
Yeah.
the ground with his feet as much as he could.
I think what we're seeing there as well is like he feels a need to generate more and more and more speed, and that's why the those knees just kind of wink in a small. You're probably just seeing a kind of an overriding with where the adductors are just trying to pull as well and get more speed into it.
On the first pull is quite good. That's probably something to concentrate on. Second pull, again, we've same little issues of change in speed is not where I'd like it to be. So we want to see a bigger change in speed from first to second pull.
Yeah.
A little bit of a loop around his knees, so I would like to see his knees back a little bit farther. So in the snatch, they're not as near full extension as they would be in the clean, but a little bit more here. So potentially either pull the bar back towards him or move his shoulders over the bar, or possibly both.
Yeah.
Preferably it's probably move the bar backwards with his knees a little bit. So again, we're not looking for full extension, but near.
So
There's a little bit of a space between his quad. Between his quad and the bar, which I don't think is a bad thing. It just kind of depends on the lifter.
yeah, so I think the space between the quad and the bar when he's on the way up, I think that's actually a disadvantage for him in this case when you look at. So he makes contact with the hip when he still has a significant amount of knee bend. If you think if we look at it as a pattern of he has a loop around the knee, then a gap at the quad, and then he has hips coming in as well as hips coming up when he extends. So I think we're getting a lot of kind of posterior to anterior movement in the bar, and we're basically just seeing the bar kind of being thrown away from him by his hips. So what I'd be saying is he should try and delay the contact with his hips until a small bit further on in the movement, so get a bit higher up before he makes contact, and just have his hips, so his hips aren't kind of flying in as well as flying up. The second thing I'd say about the contact then is he never really reaches a full extension position where he's guiding the bar up. He extends up for kind of, he's not finishing the pull, so is basically what I'm saying. So he barely reaches the full extension, and then it's just a hop under. So his elbows kind of barely bend, and it's kind of that kettlebell swing to get the bar back overhead. You'll see people getting away with that, but it's never ever correct. So if I was him, I'd be focusing on, even like this would be perfect. He'd do a high pull before he does the hang snatch, and then he's used to extending, delaying the pull, and then keeping his knuckles face down with his elbows over the bar for a small bit longer, keeping the bar much, much closer to him as he turns it over, and then he won't have to kind of pause in that bottom position. His overhead is quite good.
A little bit, I think, again, a little bit this is just from low experience, maybe with the lifts. So we're talking in years now as opposed to months. So just a little bit uncomfortable getting under the bar. It's quite strong, like it's not a weak position, it's just needs more familiarity. I think fundamentally as well, probably could do with a wider snatch grip. It's quite hard to judge from watching a lift, but I would say it looks like it could be a little bit too narrow.
That would also instantly fix the thing of making contact too early.
Absolutely.
And it would help. It would help him keep the bar closer too.
So on the way down as well, I just noticed there on the way down the hang, I would keep it a little bit closer to the body to kind of reinforce that. Like Dara was saying, he needs to, in his position, his particular case, it needs to be closer to his quads on the way up.
Yeah.
So I would be looking on the way down to kind of reverse the movement, try to keep the positions the exact same as you would, so you reinforce on the way up. That's because the idea of these hangs, especially for a beginner, is not to be doing the most weight possible. It's to reinforce good positions under control and give you time to kind of think through them.
Yeah. If I had that person, I'd do high pulls with them. So like maybe just high pulls as he's warming up, keeping his knuckles down, elbows pointed up, and then I'd move his grip out the width of 2 fingers on each side. So I not sure if I've been calibrated recently, but that's probably like 1.5 inches, 2 inches, depending on how big your fingers are. So, well, like move it out significantly is what I'm saying. It looks
cautiously as well, because sometimes that can cause a bit of wrist pain
definitely
in people when you move your grip.
Yeah.
In terms of what I would change in training for this snatch, I would add in some. So I would probably add in some lighter no contact muscle snatches to get used to the idea of pulling the bar after contact. And then the biggest thing as well is I would add in some snatch balances to get more familiarity and stability underneath the bar. Just keeping them 100% of the snatch or lower. And then potentially, I would say, try get used to that wider grip as well. So add in some lighter snatch grip strict press as well. Not crazy heavy weights, so very light, maybe like 30 kilos for sets of 4 or 5, like once a week, just kind of get used to do strengthening the overhead position.
Yeah, for sure. So the next video there is,
what have we got?
This is actually going to be pretty quick for us because technique here is quite good. It looks like a quite kind of well set in motor pattern, but the issue is the same. So if we're looking at this, just a positive and kind of, I hate comparing people like this, right? But if you look at what a kind of very simple pre-performance routine, unless now this guy has spent 60 seconds fucking twiddling his toes before he starts the video, we see very simple. So it's everything is set, then he drops his hip and goes, and that's kind of what we're alluding to as a kind of more a more simple pre-performance routine, basically. So pull here is quite good. Where I'd have the issue here is on that kind of finishing of the pull and then the turnover as it goes overhead.
Yeah, so probably the biggest part of this lift, there's probably 2 components here. So his technique is quite fluid, like you're saying, it's quite ingrained. Little bit of a hip smash. Now, we're not afraid of some hip contact, but
yeah, it's getting away from him.
There's times when it's when it's useful and it's not. So I'd say that kind of stems from, if you look at it, strange enough, when it's around nipple height, the bar is actually slowing down a little bit. So that would suggest to me that he's not used to pulling on the bar after he makes contact. So a lot of times people aren't used to the idea of, we think we make contact and we drop, and then the bar is under. But in reality, we're always pulling on the bar because we're pulling ourselves under with the bar.
Yeah.
So for his at the top, there's kind of a slowdown the turnover, which makes me think he's just not actually turning the bar over. And then at the knee, I would like to see a little bit more. I would like to see him a little bit farther in front of the bar as he's weighted a little bit farther forward just to get above the knee. I think
Yeah.
first pull is quite nice, but I would like to see a bit more shoulders over, potentially pull the bar back towards him a little bit more off the ground, so not actually touch his shins. I mean, but as he's moving the bar upwards, I'd like to see maybe move it back a little bit towards him.
But yeah, I think it's important to note as well that I think we're seeing a much lower relative percentage here. So these look like kind of warm up weights. This is what it appears to be to me. Like these look like light snatches for him. Yeah,
In terms of
what I'd be looking, like as you mentioned at the knee, like guys, if you're looking at your own videos and you think, geez, mine might look very similar to that, if you pause it just as he's at the knee, so like we spoke about knee passage earlier, that bar is definitely in front of his shoulders. That bar is probably underneath his throat somewhere. If you were to drop a line straight down, it's very like these 45-degree angles are very useful because you can kind of see. You can see everything basically. If you think you have this issue, just move the camera to the side and review it as it passes your knee. He should be a small bit more over the bar there. People will kind of do that in two different ways. So some people will just move their knees back and bring the bar back then further, and that will fix it. That's probably my more favoured one. You see people moving their knees out and then bringing the bar back. And their kind of center of mass not really changing. The issue with moving their knees back, like if we just make a vast kind of generalization, if you see the Asian female kind of template for lifting would be knees way out as the bar passes your knee. I think the level of control you have to do that is much more difficult than just moving your knees straight back and having small but stronger hamstrings and posterior chain. So if it was me and I was coaching this dude, I'd get him just to be pushing his knees back and pulling the bar back to bring the weight more over the center of his foot rather than over his toes where it is at the moment.
Last thing on technique, I would think, is there's lack of, I suppose how to describe it, is kind of a quad pop at the top when he makes contact. So there's a lot of hip forward. So the hip comes to meets the bar, comes towards it, kind of meets it in the center, but he's not really using his legs to drive the bar up with him. So that would obviously stem from not actively pulling on the bar too. So probably in terms of training, what I would start adding in here is, so some high pulls wouldn't be a bad idea, so getting used to popping with the legs, so driving with your quads into the ground when you make extension. Again, maybe possibly, I do like some no contact muscle snatch for this kind of idea of still pulling on the bar. Tall snatch is quite good for this too. Sometimes the problem with tall snatch is it's very hard and you're starting the lift under kind of tension already. So a lot of times we tend to crank our way through it instead of giving ourselves a chance to get a nice smooth lift, get used to the momentum of the lift.
I think the other issue with the tall snatch is people kind of just become very, very good at tall snatching. It like becomes a skill in itself, and they don't really use it then as a tool. They use it more just to kind of be better at tall snatches, if you get what I mean.
I'd probably add in some just good old-fashioned normal power snatches from the floor too.
Yeah, I think he'd do well with power snatch to parallel. So like a power snatch where he's catching it a bit lower. Yeah.
Or I think I learned the other countries call that half snatch.
Do they call it half snatch?
Yeah, the Polish book there I was reading, your man, they call it half squat snatch.
Half snitch. All right.
Interesting they use it in the 80s.
Yeah.
All right.
Great.
That's quite a good lift overall. So, two things. I'd like to see some heavy weights to that one.
Yeah, I would. I'll just send you the next link here. A good thing there is when we're talking about the knees out versus knees back, if you're a lifter who's trying to cue the knees back position for themselves, go and look at Toma Lordiana's particularly her snatch. It doesn't happen so much in her clean, but she's somebody who has very, very straight knee tracking, and you'll be able to see what like a good knees back position looks like as she passes her knees. Do you get that next linker?
All right. Looks like we have a little masters lifter there.
Jesus,
great
that
to
was
see.
Very ageist.
I can say what I want. So
I can start
not
this one
bad.
if you want. Technique is actually quite good here. Uh,
So what I'd be so it's actually quite a good angle as well to view things. If in future you're submitting them 45 is quite nice. A little bit lower down is good. So probably the biggest one that jumps out of me here. So the biggest fix is at the point of contact. So contact is actually quite nice. It's very high up. I really like that. But he's not bending or rowing. The bars just ends up nicely. Just kind of say the upper quarter of his quad, which is a great place. His shoulders on top of the bar. The only problem with his contact is he's basically pausing at the hip. So if you're watching this, he gets his hip, pauses for a second, and then turns the bar over. So what you want to see here is just like we were saying earlier. So the acceleration needs to be increasing all the time. So from the floor. So I think this might come from sometimes people the habit. He's kind of gripping and ripping it off the floor.
yeah,
And then by the time he gets to his hip, he's got nowhere else to go with the speed. So I'd like to see a little bit slower off the ground and then increasing speed as he gets to the hip. So when he gets to the hip, he needs to be as fast as he possibly can. So pulling the bar as much as he can, extending with his legs as much as he can, and trying to pull that bar up. So having no pause. So a lot of times this is one of the things where people aren't aware of it. And when you are aware of it and you see it and you're like, oh, I do pause at the hip, just learning to turn over the bar a little bit faster and getting smoother through the contact would be better.
yeah. One thing I'd change here is, like, when you talk about gripping and ripping, especially on so this video has lighter lifts, and then as we go through, the lifts get heavier, especially on the lighter ones at the start. Rolling the bar in and out from your shins is not a great way if gripping and ripping is one of your bigger issues. So I think what we're seeing is the position that he pulls off the floor with is not an optimal position. So his shoulders are slightly rounded forward. He fixes this on the way up. So by the time he kind of gets to his knees, his shoulders are pulled back. But now, because of the kind of excessive speed off the floor, the kind of jerky motion off the floor, particularly on the lighter ones, he's getting an elbow bend as he passes his knees. So like the bar is kind of overtaking him, if you get what I mean. What I would do here is, like, he should be setting up and pausing for a second before he lifts, getting his shoulders into a much better position, and his chin a small bit higher. So you see with people who have kind of difficulties around mobility when they're setting up in the start of their pull, I'd get him set up with his hips a tiny bit lower, but more so his shoulders back. So shoulders back and chin up, and none of the rolling the bar in and out. Like, not to sound like a broken record, but those kind of inconsistencies do not help anybody. You'll see like CrossFitters and stuff get away with it. But yeah, especially around the kind of 60 kilo mark, you start to see that kind of awkward position on the floor before the pull starts. So chin is down, his neck is almost neutral. We like to teach deadlifts with a neutral neck. That doesn't transfer over then into weightlifting surroundings. So if I'm doing my pull, like, for the lifts, you want as much feedback as possible. So we wear shoes that have a very, very hard sole so we can get feedback on balance, like kinesthetic feedback. We'll feel where the weight is on our foot. We're not standing on like a soft, squishy sole. So we get feedback from there. But the other way we get feedback is with our head. So like our inner ear and our balance, and with our eyes. So if I'm set with a neutral neck and I'm looking down towards the floor, and then as I pull, naturally I can't keep looking at the floor because my head is getting higher, I'm going to lose some of the visual feedback. So he hasn't picked a point kind of high up in front of him. And I'm also going to change that kind of feedback I'm going to be getting from my inner ear, because my head is going to go from a neutral position now to a kind of rearward position. So what I'd say is, if I was him, pause for a second, get your shoulders set a bit better, bring your chin up, and then pick something that's kind of 6 to 8 feet up off the floor, kind of a good bit in front of you. Pick that point, look at it the whole time, and then go.
What I would probably two things I would do in training here to. So first of all, actually, if I was coaching him in person, what I would look for is, it'd just interesting to see if he's setting up for the clean, like Dara was saying, but we put a little 2.5 kilo plates underneath his heels to see if that would help with the. So sometimes there's always a place for working on a mobility and trying to dress as best you can, but also mechanically changing things to your advantage if possible. So he's wearing Addy Powers, interesting enough, and they're quite a low heel.
Yeah.
They're quite flat footed. I used those for years, a long time ago, and I would be interested just to see if we put in his start position. So we didn't do any lifts, but just get him set up, put 2.5 kilo plates underneath his heels, and see how that start position changed. And then potentially, if it was possible, would be to look at getting maybe higher heel shoes, something like the Anta or the Nikes twos, maybe something like that.
Yeah.
Um, so in training, what I would start implementing is 2 lifts, a variation of the same thing. Really, is I would look at very slow eccentric hangs just above the floor, and then focusing on changing that speed as fast as possible. And then I would also do these with pulls, but I would just do a single, so normal speed on the way up, but focusing on that good start position, and then very slow on the way down. And just do these singles, do like kind of 8, 9, 10 singles at maybe 100% of your clean, or 105, 110%, just for singles. You don't need to do a lot of warm ups with these. You'll
Yeah.
just use straps as well, no problem. And then on the cleans, I would do full cleans with these as well. So just normal speed on the way up, and then very slow eccentric in the hang all the way to just above the floor, and then singles again or doubles if you feel you need them, depending on what kind of weights you're using.
Yeah. What I'd be recommending on this is, if you have these kind of issues in the pull, especially around, like, you can kind of get away with it for bar path, but when it's things like the position you have at the start, or the speed you're pulling the bar off the floor with, I wouldn't put in a hang directly before it, because I think a lot of the time then you use the hang to give you feedback before you do the clean. Like, maybe use that as you're warming up, but then for your working sets you should just be doing a clean, or a clean and jerk, if you get what I mean. Don't, like, I think we see it a lot where people use a pull or a high pull beforehand as a crutch. If it's a position thing off the ground, you need to just get used to getting into that good position and pulling off the floor in that good position for the clean. Don't always give yourself the thing of a pull beforehand.
Have we more?
We do. I'll send it over here now. So this is going to be our second last video, and it's a snatch.
This is going to take 14 hours to upload to YouTube.
Yeah.
Alright, what have we
A
got?
snatch. So it's 90 kilo snatch.
Oh, Jesus, he's too tall for lifting and I give up. They are, if you can see these are the best possible plates. They're just those vintage and eco plates. That is, this lift is, I love it already.
So on the start position here, right, we talk about getting the grip width right. So he's obviously at the disadvantage where he's too tall for a standard barbell. So he's all the way out to the collars. That will become more important later on. One thing I would say here, that he seems to have incredibly long femurs in relation to the length of his torso. So you're seeing knees over the bar an awful lot. So that's not an ideal position, but if it was me and I was there in person coaching, what I'd be doing is trying to get those shins a small bit more vertical and bring the hips a small bit higher. That will just stop the bar going out in front quite so much. It actually happens as he pulls the bar off the floor, but then I think he just loses a small bit of quad strength on the way up. So if we're looking at this, just as he pulls the bar off the floor, we'd prefer hips a small bit higher, and then just have a kind of a more concerted or more coordinated pull off the floor, rather than it being this kind of real heaving motion to get the bar up. But yeah, that's what I'd change off the floor, would be hips a bit higher, knees further back, and shins more vertical.
So I would like to see, so like I was saying, I'd like to see hips a little bit higher. So that's the nature of being a taller lifter for weightlifting, is you'll have to rely on your back a little bit more, because if you have very long legs, they're not going to be as strong as someone of a shorter disposition might be. So on the third pull here is what I'm seeing. I would like to see elbows higher for longer, so they're turning over a little bit too early. So I would like to see his knuckles down for a little bit longer, elbows up, a bit more vertical for just a little bit longer, just to give myself a chance to pull it. So give him. He's kind of turning it over too much. He's almost pressing the bar into the bottom, and you can see it's a little bit soft when he catches it.
Yeah, I think.
One issue as well, is he's jumping inwards. So that's not always a huge problem, but as you can see, he's quite finding it quite hard to stand up from the bar or from the squat.
Yeah,
So there's not. So unfortunately, for sometimes when you're lifting, there's not always a whole lot you can do if you have poor proportions. Now that's not to say you can't get stronger.
yeah.
I would probably look at increasing leg strength here, and outside of training would benefit him a lot. I would probably have quite a few pulls to strengthen his back a bit more.
And to be honest, what I'd look at doing is, so the turnover is an issue because of the fact he has to roll the bar into his hip for the top of his pull. What I'd
Definitely.
look at doing is he should be making contact a third of the way up his thigh, or a third of the way down his thigh, sorry, with straight arms. So rather than making contact at the hip and kind of, what he's doing basically is sacrificing a lot of his ability to bend his elbows after the pull by rowing
Yeah.
those in and kind of using up that elbow bend before he makes contact. So what I'd be looking for here is, after the bar passes his knees, stop rowing it in. So straight arms here. He then extend upwards, making contact a third of the way down his thigh, where a normal person would make contact for their clean, and then using that elbow bend to keep the bar close as it goes overhead. I think that's going to be a much more beneficial position for him. Like there's plenty of people sweep the bar up their quad and make contact a bit lower in the snatch. Gabriel being one of them. Obviously, Gabriel's not doing it because he has really long arms. So that's my main recommendation here. It would really be to cue that he doesn't have to roll the bar into his hip. He can make contact where a standard lifter would make contact on their clean. He'll lose a small bit of that top end, and he'll lose a bit of height on the pull, but he'll gain a huge amount of control with how close that bar stays to him.
Overall, the positions up until halfway up the thigh are quite good, I think.
Yeah. It's just as he passes the top of his knees, he starts rowing it in with his arms, and that's kind of where the issue begins. Yeah, so I think the main thing he needs to work on is, like as you were saying, getting a small bit more leg strength would really, really help. I definitely try having higher hips before he starts pulling off the ground. And then the third thing I would do is make contact. Don't roll the bar into your hip, basically. Make contact on the quads, and then use that kind of upper back strength to keep the bar closer to him as it's going overhead.
I'd probably, if I was him, I'd gain a lot of body weight.
Well, that's what you say for everyone.
No, it's not. But for him, it would definitely help.
Yeah, it would.
It would help an awful lot. It would favourably change some leverages.
Yeah. I'd particularly gain quads.
Yeah.
So
Right.
the last one is a snatch as well.
Okay. So first off, I would. Right. Are we going?
Yeah, we're going. You start.
All right. So first off, I would not lift on those soft mats. Would be my first point
Yeah.
of view. I would remove one of the mats and just put them under the bar. Although lifting under concrete or tar is disgusting to do. It feels like you're destroying your shoes. But in this situation, I would just wouldn't. It's just too soft. It's not something you want to get sufficient kind of return of force, and you're pushing into the ground. And with those, it distributes a lot in like kind of random directions around you because it's so soft. So you want something hard to push against, which is why you always see people lifting on metal, or not metal, timber
Yeah.
floors. Yeah, so that's what the biggest thing I would change here. It's just not helping anything, especially in the catch as well. So you don't want to land on something. Well, they look quite hard. Ultimately, you still want something that's that's not kind of in any way spongy. So I'll just start with the first pull there, Fitz, and I'll let you get the rest of it, sure. Or second pull.
Marvelous.
So start position. So just before he pulls, his femurs are, well, I'm not going to say quite long. They're long for his start position where he is. So while we do see some lifters start with their hamstrings basically touching their calves, there's actually a name in weightlifting literature, and it's called the Hungarian start. And I have no idea why it's called Hungarian start, but that's what it's called. So you start with your shoulders well behind the bar. For most beginners, people tend to drift towards it for whatever reason. it probably feels the most comfortable because you can relax the most into the start. But for him, I would start with my shoulders, his shoulders, more in front of the bar, or I'd raise his hips up a bit.
Yeah.
So again, if you go back to the weightlifting literature, the Russians would have said that, um, say like a knee angle of more than 90 degrees. So when your legs are above parallel, you get the most leg engagement. And for most of us, we're not really special snowflakes. So I would go with the basics, say, until such time as you've proved that you're a freak athlete. So for him, I would start with slightly higher quads, shoulders over a little bit. So as you can see, because his quads are lower, or his hips, his start position is lower, the bar has to loop forward because he's trying to get his shoulders over the bar. So there's kind of what's called the toppling effect of the barbell and the pull. So it's pulling you forward. So he's in an unfavorable position off the floor. So when he starts to
Yeah.
pull, it drags him forward. His hips move up and his shoulders move over to try counterbalance this. But I'd like to see a higher start position. So get in the position his body's trying to pull him into before the bar lifts, so he can get in a favorable position. All right. You wanna take over?
Yeah. So what I'd say, so if you just look at that kind of first pull, just to finish off on it, like because those hips are so low, if you play just the first pull, his hips raise up probably 2.5 feet. So like if you look at the ball of his hip joint moves at least 2.5 feet before the bar even clears his knees. So like he has a huge level of displacement around the hip joint. So like huge amounts of movement going on, but the bar isn't actually going anywhere, if you get what I mean. So I definitely agree with the bringing the hips up and the knees back. The main issue I see here is the bar is very, very far away from him as it passes his knees. So like if you pause it there as the bar passes his knees, he probably has 6 inches gap between his knees and the bar. And then that comes when he makes contact. He is all the way up on his tippy toes before he makes contact. So if you imagine his hips are moving on one track, his barbell is moving on the other, he has to come up so high and bring his hips so far forward because that bar path is way, way out in front of him. So if we take as a rule of thumb, when the bar makes contact with your hip, you should usually have your heels as close to being flat on the floor as possible. So that'll allow you to put as much vertical force into the bar with your quads as you possibly can. So what I'd be doing is keeping the bar a hell of a lot closer at the knee. I think having higher hips off the floor will help with that. And then aiming to make contact with flat feet, I think, will be a really, really good one. That'll really help him. His pull, so because he makes contact with his hips so high, he doesn't really get to finish his pull, if you get what I mean. So when he extends up, he's basically all the way done, and you'll see him just jumping under the bar. So if he was to do some no contact muscle snatches with these, I think would really, really help. Just like forcing him to be a small bit more patient when he makes contact. His catch position, you'll see again, when he catches the bar, he's that really overextended armpit position. So the bar is out in front of his toes when he does catch it. And then just a small bit unstable. So this looks like kind of close to a PB lift or a higher percentage or higher relative percentage for this one. So what you're seeing is, because the bar is out in front, he has to drop his chest down and push his chest forward to try and kind of compensate and push the bar back behind him. And then that kind of unstable overhead catching position. So plenty snatch balances, plenty overhead squats would really, really help with that. And then in terms of the positioning, keeping those hips higher off the floor, then keeping the bar closer throughout the pull, and being a small bit more patient on the pull will help put the bar in a better position overhead.
Yeah, so really all this stems from, or basically all of the first and second pull stems from just the starting position. So if you fix that, that would help an awful lot.
Yeah.
Then it would help the bar drifting away from you at the start. And then obviously if it's closer as a start, the deviation is not as big by the time he gets to your second pull. So he'll get a little more legs in when he gets contact.
Yeah.
All right, gentlemen and ladies and gentlemen, thanks for listening.
Yeah, it's been great.
hope if you enjoyed it.
Thanks for
let us know.
everybody who sent in their links for videos for form checks as well. And obviously, thanks for the old Patreons. So if you want to be in for a form check, you can just join the Patreon page and you just throw up a link there, and we'll try and get to them as quickly as we possibly can. Let us know what you think about the video. Thanks again.